And now I am very happy to introduce my neighbor. Yes, we actually live next door in Stockholm. But this is not only my neighbor, it's also head of unit at the Swedish PES, Mr. Mathias Wahlsten. Please give him a warm hand.
Okay, thank you, Anki, and thank you for having me here today. Arbetsförmedlingen has now been in charge of the introduction of newly arrived immigrants for a bit over 5 years. And I must say it's been a challenging but also very demanding task to take on. But I'm also very proud to say that we are now settling into an approach that works for now, but also an approach that can make us ready for political changes, organizational changes, but also changes when it comes to migration. But getting to where we are now has required very close cooperations with other actors, but also a very close cooperation with our decision makers. We have also had to make a lot of fine-tuning when it comes to methods to deal with the challenges that we face. And when I say the challenges that we face, I know that might sound a bit insensitive when we're talking about individuals who have had to face challenges unimaginable to the ones that we have when they're fleeing their homes. But of course, in my way of seeing it, our futures are now intertwined, and our capacity to address integration issues will directly influence these individuals who are fleeing to Sweden. Today, I will try to tell you more about how these challenges over the past 5 years has crystallized into a systematic approach, an approach that is of the utmost importance when it comes to the mission on taking on integration to make integration work to address the current, but also the future lack of skilled labor and a declining working age population. But first, I would like to start by giving you a brief background. The Introduction Act was entered into force in December 2010. You can say that the reform marked a reform in the Swedish integration policy. The public administration of the integration process was centralized and was handed over from the municipalities to us at Arbetsförmedlingen. Even though the municipalities still play a crucial role when it comes to the integration of newly arrived immigrants. For example, when we talk about Swedish for immigrants, but also various kinds of adult education program. But the Swedish Arbetsförmedlingen is in charge of the overall coordination when it comes to all introduction activities. And the rationale behind the reform was to allow the integration process to focus on activities that will actually lead to someone finding a job, to make them enter the labor market. And the aim of the reform is, as you know, very ambitious. It is to help some newly arrived immigrants, namely humanitarian migrants and their spouses, to gain employment or begin a university program within the course of 2 years. And our main role at Arbetsförmedlingen starts after a person receives their residence permit. They will meet with one of our employment officers for an introduction interview. And the introduction interview is usually a series of conversation with the goal of setting up an introduction plan suited to the individual background, but also to the individual needs of that person. The introduction plan is usually a full-time commitment for a period of 2 years. The plan is terminated, however, if the individual has worked full-time for 6 months or started studying at a university. And during these 2 years, the participant will receive introduction benefit from us at Arbetsförmedlingen. And the introduction benefit is 33 euros per day, 5 days a week during the entire 2-year program. The participant will partake in a number of courses and activities that are selected by us, together with the individual, with the overall objective to find and fulfill the goal of the program, to find work or start a university program. The plan is also followed up and updated according to the needs of the individual. And there are 3 mandatory activities in the plan. We have Swedish for immigrants, which is provided by the municipality. We do also have civic orientation that is also provided by the municipality. And the third part is various kinds of employment preparation activities. They can include activities such as recognition of prior learning or skills assessments. We do also have recognition of foreign qualifications. We have labor market training programs, but also vocational programs. And we have internships at workplace, which can also be combined with vocational courses. In addition to this, the person can also take up a regular or subsidized employment, which can be full-time or part-time. They can also start up a business, or they can attend upper secondary school provided from the municipality. In other words, you can say there are many ways to combine activities to create a personalized plan, but it's not always easy for our employment officers to know what to select or even when to select it. And this is why we have developed a systematic approach to help guide our caseworkers in their daily work, but also to create a structure within which choices can become clearer. When we were given the overall responsibility for the Introduction Act, nobody, me included, could predict that the number of participants would increase to the levels that we see today, or that the numbers that we expect in the near future. At the end of April this year, we had over 56,000 participants in our introduction plan, a number that will most likely double over the coming few years. Are you finished? Another way of looking at it is the number of participants per month over time. During the first 2 years of the introduction program, we had a monthly influx of about 700 to 800. And I think that those of our employment officers who worked back then can remember these days as a time when they could take time to focus on each individual and to make an individual planning. But then 2 things happened. The conflict in Syria escalated to the degree that people starting to seek protection abroad to a much larger extent than before. But Sweden also decided to grant all Syrian refugees who made it past our borders a 3-year permit. The number of participants per month almost doubled. And in the past few months, the number of new participants has reached over 2,500. And this, of course, poses a challenge to us. It poses a challenge to our staff when it comes to setting up an introduction plan that contains activities that are suited to the individual's competencies, background, and goals. But it also poses a challenge when it comes to making sure that the activities will actually lead to making someone job ready. And when we talk about the group of people that we work with and for, the group of people that is obviously very diverse. They are diverse both in terms of origin, which you can see in this diagram here. We have participants from Syria, Somalia, Eritrea. Somalia was the most common group when we started the program back in 2010, and today people from Syria is the most common group. But the group also varies in terms of educational background. And if we look at the educational level among the participants over time, the share of people with post-secondary education has increased, and the share of people with primary or lower secondary education has decreased. It is also clear to us that the most participants belongs to one of these 2 groups at the end of the spectrum here, creating 2 groups that often require rather different kinds of support and different kinds of activities from us to become job ready. And you can say that this highlights 2 challenges for the Arbetsförmedlingen. One is to identify the individual's educational background and its equivalence within the Swedish education system. In other words, to find appropriate methods to assess qualifications and vocational skills of these 2 distinct groups, both when it comes to formal qualifications and skills acquired in other ways. And this is a challenge that we have focused more and more during the past few years. And I believe that finding a solution to this challenge is central when it comes to a successful labor market integration. And here, the educational system is crucial in this success. But the second challenge is to build on what the individual already has so that they can become job ready. And for us, this means offering suitable bridging courses for those with foreign qualifications and foreign work experience who are in need of it. But it's also when it comes to offering those with little or no education or work experience, adult education to ensure a long-term integration within the labor market. And you can say that these two are no easy tasks to take on. But I will try to show you how these two have become central when it comes to our systematic approach. But before I'm going into the systematic approach, I would like to present you with one more challenge that we are facing. That challenge was a principal motivation behind the developing of our systematic approach, and that one is the question about gender equality. As you can see on the slide here behind me, women are much less likely to work or study after the end of the introduction program. 21% of women work or study compared with 39% of men. And women are therefore more likely to stay with us in various kinds of labor market program, or, as was pointed out in the recent OECD report, we simply lose contact with them. We are more than twice as likely to lose contact with women compared with men, not including those who will leave us for work or studies. Here we are of course planning to follow up what this can mean, but also in order to make sure that it will not happen in the future. One reason is that we know is behind the loss of contact is of course the fact that women take out parental leave in a much higher rate than men, both during the introduction program but also after the introduction program. But I'm sure that that one is not the only reason behind the results that we see behind me here. But one reason that I'm sure it's not is educational background. Educational levels among males and females are fairly similar. In fact, if we break down the status, work or studies, as you saw in the previous slide, it is clear that regardless of educational background, men are more likely to work or study after the end of the after the end of the introduction program. And as you can see here behind me, the biggest difference is women and men with a shorter educational background. Only 13% of women were working or studying 90 days after the introduction program, compared with 36% of men. And like I mentioned before, we know that women are more likely to take parental leave, which is one reason behind the results in this slide. But we do also know that we treat men and women differently. And this is true for all clients, not only for those who participate in the introduction program. For example, Arbetsförmedlingen procures more labor market training programs in male-dominated sectors compared with female-dominated sectors. And we did recently perform a study on the quality of the records when we look at the participants in the introduction program. And this study showed us that it's quite clear that our officers are better at registering complete but also coherent information about male participants compared with female participants. And this most probably leads to men having more suitable support and more relevant activities from us at Arbetsförmedlingen. And this in turn may be one of the reasons behind the results that we see, that men are working to a much larger extent than women when the introduction program ends. As I said, a little more than 5 years has now passed since the introduction reform entered into force. And since then, Arbetsförmedlingen has gained valuable experience and knowledge of how the program has functioned so far. And during the fall of 2013, we ran a pilot project with the aim of developing a systematic approach to how we can work with labor market integration. And the project took its starting point in local experiences and good practices within Arbetsförmedlingen. You can say that the project was initiated to combat some of the challenges that we have seen and still see. And some of them were mentioned by me earlier today in this presentation, such as unmotivated differences in the support, but also unmotivated differences in the activities that men and women get, as well as participants with different educational background. But another one was also to strengthen the individual's own influence and knowledge of the introduction process and its goals. So how does the systematic approach work in practice? Well, in order to conceptualize the process, we broke it down into 4 logical steps. And each step includes a set of activities that the participant should get access to at a certain point during the introduction program. But how long each step can go on in time depends on the person's starting point, personal development, but also personal progress. So there is no really time limit for a certain step within the systematic approach. The different steps in the systematic approach are explained in a process map, but also in a checklist that can function as a tool, but also as a support for our officers when meeting our clients. And in the checklist, there is a number of questions, but also a number of remarks that has to be done for the officer so that he or she can check them off when they're finished. And you can say that the thought of this method can contribute to a more equal support from Arbetsförmedlingen, but also to make sure that activities among the participants take place regardless of one's gender or regardless of one's educational background, as the caseworkers use the same checklist during the entire process, and also not depending on where in the country the participant will partake in our activities. You can also say that each step is designed to bring the individual closer to the labor market. The first step, as you can see here behind me, focuses fully on assessing skills and qualifications and the individual's prospects on entering the labor market. In the second step, the participant starts his or her first activities within the introduction plan. And in the third step, the activities are much more job-focused. And once the third step is finished, the fourth step focuses completely on matching and job searching. And I'm aware that you can see the steps here behind me, but it's not possible for me today to make them justice in a presentation like this. But what is important is that this approach aims to make sure that we have not only asked the right questions, but also that we have, with the job focus, provided the right activities for the right person. And it can be among areas like translation and assessments of qualification. It can be evaluation of work capacity, assessment of skills and counseling, or when it comes to job seeking, matching, and educational counseling. I know that in the breakout session that will follow, you have the opportunity to get more detailed information from a few members of my brilliant staff who are with me here today. We have Soledad Grafey, who will talk about fast tracks, which is a quicker introduction of newly arrived immigrants. And we actually have fast track participants at this very hotel here today that make this conference possible. And you can also listen to Rebecca Kaufman, who will lead the session about skills assessments when it comes to practical methods and tools. And under this year, we are fully implementing the systematic approach nationwide, and it will be fully running from the beginning of next year. And the systematic approach is also something that we think can work well over time when it comes to changes in our organization, changes in our mission, but also as our condition may change over the future, which I'm sure they will. For example, we can expect an even higher influx to the introduction program during the next coming years. And you can say that the higher influx will make it more difficult for us as an authority to meet the individual needs of each participant within the introduction program. And with the systematic approach, we can hopefully help our employment officers to better prioritize between different tasks within the introduction program to make sure that we always keep the job focus first. And in the end, it can also hopefully help them save some time, something that is very valuable within our organization, especially when the number of participants per case officer will increase. And another challenge that lies ahead is the proposed temporary law regarding immigration that is expected to come into effect this July. As you might know, and as you have heard here before today, this law will limit residence permit granted to asylum seekers to periods of 13 months or three years, depending on if the person is granted asylum or subsidiary protection. And this is in brass contrast with the current practice of granting permanent residency to asylum seekers in Sweden today. Even though the permits can be extended if there are grounds for continued protection or if the person can support him or herself. And I must say that it's very difficult for us to predict how this law will impact the participant, but it's most probable that some participants will find it difficult to concentrate on a long-term integration. Instead, people might want to focus on finding a low-skilled job fast rather than taking the long way around to get their skills and qualifications assessed, maybe take up bridging courses or even language courses in order to get a higher skilled job. But it might also be challenging for us to motivate a person to go through all 4 steps of the process the way that we have set them up. But on the other hand, it might also help our employment officers and the participant to outline maybe 2 alternative routes towards finding a job. Maybe one short term and one long term if the residence permit is extended. And finally, I would like to end my session here by saying that it's my firm belief that we have to find ways to make use of all the competencies and motivation that each individual brings to Sweden. And with that said, I would like to show you how well it can turn out when a person gets the support and the guidance he needs from Arbetsförmedlingen.
أنا جاي من سوريا، إلي هون 2 سنين ومعي زوجتي وعندي هلأ طفلة عمرها 4 شهور. أنا هلأ أخذت المطعم اللي كنت أنا أشتغل فيه. أنا بشتغل بأرفد سيار بمطعم فراسز، نبيع همبرجر ومختلف الشغلات مع الهمبرجر. أنا كنت بسوريا خريج إدارة أعمال وخريج معهد متوسط فندقي اختصاص طبخ. اشتغلت بمجال الفنادق لفترة 6 شهور، وبعدين اتجهت لاتجاه إدارة الأعمال، فكان عندي محل بالبداية. بعدين هذا المحل فتحت فرع تاني وفرع ثالث للمحل. كتير مهم إنه الإنسان يعرف إنه لازم يشتغل هون، لأنه رح يحس بفراغ كتير كبير. فتكلمت مع مكتب العمل أنه ممكن أنا أعمل تدريب بمكان يكون فيه ناس بتحكي سويدي. عملت براكتيك بالبداية بشركة كانت تعمل دورة أنك تكتب CV عن حالك. فأنا عملت هاي الدورة وبعدين عملت اوتبيلينج عملت براكتيك بهذا أو تدريب بنفس المكان مشان أفهم مزبوط قوانين العمل. أول شيء خوفوني قالوا لي كتير برد وأنت ما رح تقدر تتحمل الموضوع. فبلشت أتخيل الموضوع كأنك أنت عايش بمجمدة. بعد ما سمعت هذا الحكي قررت إني خوض التجربة بنفسي وإجيت على الشمال. بالنسبة لموضوع البرد، في برد بس في كهرباء، في تدفئة، وهي الدليل إنه هلا أنا قاعد بالشمال وهي قاعد بالنصكم. هلا يمكن درجة الحرارة -10 أو -15، ما بعرف بالضبط، وأنا قاعد بالنصكم. موضوع طبيعي. بالوقت الحالي أنا رضيان عن الشيء اللي عملته، بس أكيد الإنسان دائما بيطمح للأحسن وللأفضل. أنا هلا بلشت بشغلي الخاص بالمطعم الخاص، ومع الوقت مثل ما قدرت أتوسع بالبلد اللي كنت أنا عايش فيه ممكن أنا أفتح عدة فروع. ممكن أنا أطور أو أجيب أكل ما كان موجود بالمنطقة اللي أنا عايش فيها.